Hello, I'm a housewife who's been married for 28 years. Having met my husband at a university social and then getting pregnant before marriage, I never expected that spending one night with my handsome husband would change my life so much. We have one daughter. Strangely, even if we had another child, I would miscarry quickly. In fact, my husband liked to go out, and I had to take full responsibility for making a living and raising our daughter, so it was too much to hope for another child. I had the mindset of raising just one child well, but our daughter had been difficult from a young age. I managed to get her to study enough to enter a four-year university and thought she would get a job without any problems. But in her first year of employment, she suddenly got pregnant and brought a man home to introduce him as her future husband. The man who was to be my son-in-law had a mediocre appearance and a decent job. However, he was 10 years older than my daughter and a bit timid, which made me a bit worried. We gave in to our daughter's insistence and allowed the marriage. The in-laws were old and financially very generous, so they suggested we should get them married as soon as possible. Our daughter was strong-willed, and my husband was not interested in housework or our daughter's affairs, so the wedding went smoothly. They said we wouldn't have to worry about anything because we were bringing in a young daughter-in-law who was 10 years younger. I thought it was a relief, but was I a bad parent? They went on a honeymoon, and I thought they would live happily ever after. But one day my son-in-law called in the middle of the night, and I rushed to the hospital, only to find out that my daughter had miscarried the child she had before marriage. My son-in-law was crying in the corner, and my daughter was calmly greeting me while playing with her phone. I was surprised, but I thought she needed to take care of her body, even though she didn't give birth, so I stayed at their house for a few days with my son-in-law's consent and helped with various house chores. My daughter was on leave from work, but she was thinking of quitting and starting a business, so she was just hanging around at home. I felt grateful to my son-in-law who would bring home delicious food every day, even taking care of my share to look after our daughter. Perhaps my daughter felt comfortable knowing that I was taking care of most of the house chores. She started asking me to stay overnight. In fact, I started feeling attached to my daughter's newly house, where my daughter and my kind son-in-law were present, rather than being alone with my husband. However, I started noticing that the relationship between my daughter and son-in-law was becoming strained. Their conversations became less frequent, and my daughter would leave the house to hang out with her friends, timed with my son-in-law's arrival. My son-in-law and I would awkwardly, but not unpleasantly, eat dinner or watch TV together. As a month approached, my daughter spent more time outside, and I felt like it was time for me to leave as well. But when I tried to go back home, my son-in-law stopped me. He said that he often argued with our daughter when I wasn't around, and he couldn't even get a proper meal. Watching my daughter's married life for over a month reminded me of when I first got married. My husband barely came home, gave me just enough money for survival, and cut off his interest. I saw myself reflected in my son-in-law often and felt sorry for him, becoming more and more depressed, so I decided to stay and at least provide him meals. That day, my daughter hastily packed and left for her all-night trip with her college friends. My kind son-in-law was excited to give her some pocket money for the trip, seeing my daughter excited like before she got married. I had no choice but to send her off to have a good time. My son-in-law came home in the evening and suggested that we dine out for the first time. We left the vicinity of the house tried out a hotel buffet for the first time in a long time, and went on a drive nearby until late at night. We came back home, and my son-in-law suggested we taste the wine he got as a gift from his company. The wine made me feel a bit tipsy. Recently, I had to stop several fights between my daughter and son-in-law, and I think I drank a bit more than usual, thinking there won't be any fights today. My son-in-law, who seemed to have accumulated a lot of resentment, started crying and venting his frustration. I felt guilty for raising my daughter wrong, and seeing a grown man crying, I moved next to him to comfort him. As his tears started to subside, our eyes met. At that moment, my son-in-law's face came closer, and we naturally ended up in my room, spending the night together. I opened my eyes, still feeling a bit tipsy, and the events of the previous night flashed through my mind, causing me to practically leap out of bed. I remembered my son-in-law wiping my body with a warm water towel and even dressing me. While I was in a state of confusion, my daughter came home and started looking for me, which startled me, and I went out to the living room. A friend of hers, who had been drinking with her until morning, had brought her home, and she was lying on the floor, calling for me. I took her to the master bedroom, laid her down, and noticed that my son-in-law was not home. He must have gone to work. After tidying up my sleeping daughter's things and doing some housework, it was time for my son-in-law to finish work. As usual, my daughter and I were sitting on the sofa watching TV, but I was so nervous about how to react and what facial expression to make when my son-in-law walked through the front door that my heart was pounding. I've never sweated so much out of nervousness before. Unable to handle the tension, I said I was going to bed early because I was a bit tired, and went to my room. My son-in-law came in. My daughter said first, "Mom's not feeling well, so she's gone to bed early. Let's order takeout." And my son-in-law agreed. They watched TV for a while and shared the takeout food, and soon the house was quiet. I fell asleep earlier than usual as the tension eased. However, the night I spent with my son-in-law kept coming back to me in my dreams, causing me to wake up several times. In my head, I kept telling myself that was wrong, and the guilt I felt towards my daughter was so intense it felt like my heart was being squeezed. But on the other hand, I felt a flutter of excitement at having found someone to fill the void left by my indifferent husband, who had been living like a recluse for a long time. I decided to return home as I couldn't stand it anymore and secretly left. But my son-in-law said he would take me, as if he was already awake. It seemed strange to refuse, so I got in his car and we drove home, not saying a word to each other. The tension in the car was unbearable, but as soon as I got home, I felt relieved. I returned to my normal life after a long time, but a few days later, I got a call from my daughter. At that moment, I thought she had found out everything, and I was shaking with fear. But my daughter was fine. She complained that the laundry was piling up, and the sink was full of dishes because I wasn't there, and asked me where I had been when it hadn't even been 2 months since she had a miscarriage. She told me to come home, throwing a tantrum that I couldn't tell was anger or irritation. I couldn't tell her the whole truth, and I couldn't ignore my daughter's anger. So I told her I would come in a few days. In the meantime, my son-in-law contacted me and said he wanted to meet outside once, which made my head spin. I got in his car that he brought to pick me up in front of my house, and we went to a quiet place in the suburbs to have a coffee and talk. He said, "I never really wanted to get married in the first place, and I never even thought about having children. I got married for my parents, so I don't really think about divorce, and my wife feels the same. We've agreed to respect each other's lives and live that way. I don't mind living like this." He explained about the agreement he had made with my daughter and the talks they had had before. He then expressed his wish to maintain a close relationship with me, his mother-in-law, as we have been doing. I was unable to respond with anything other than agreement, as I was trying to hide my strange excitement and anxiety, fearing that he might hear my heartbeat. When we got home, it was noticeably different from when I was around. The house was in a complete mess. My daughter and son-in-law had been living separate lives, each having their own room. It seemed less that they didn't touch each other, but rather they appeared more like a window shopping couple. During the day, I noticed that my daughter was communicating with someone new. When I asked her about it, she said her husband didn't care either way, and she was more than satisfied with the three of us, me, her, and her husband, living this way. She even suggested that I divorce my practically non-existent husband and start a new life, expressing her wish for me and her father to split up and for a complete merger with her and her husband's family. Apparently, she had also spoken to her father about it, but as always, he was indifferent and said he had already started another family, so he actually wanted to get a divorce and remarry. In fact, I had vaguely thought about it, but I'm now considering divorce. My daughter, on the other hand, seems to be keen on continuing her lifestyle of not caring about staying out all night or coming home in the morning to sleep, then going out again in the evening to have fun. On such nights, my son-in-law would signal for us to dine out. When I agree, he would go out for a while, then return to spend the night with me, whispering words of love. In fact, I guess I don't really hate the fact that I'm continuing this lifestyle. I've come to know my husband's true feelings, and in the midst of it all, my daughter is so much like her father, while my son-in-law treats me like a lover. All of this is very confusing, but it seems like everyone else would be happy if I just stayed still. The problem is that I don't feel unhappy about the current situation. Rather, I feel more vibrant than I have in the nearly 30 years of my married life. Unlike before, when everything felt lethargic and I just wanted to give up, my daughter may be out and about often, but she's also looking for a job and preparing to start her own business. It seems that they are managing well in terms of tax issues and financial support, considering their status as a married couple. However, they don't seem to be making any effort to restore their relationship as a couple, such as sharing a room or being intimate. My son-in-law continues to treat me better than anyone else, buying me gifts as if we were lovers, and even setting up dates. Every moment I spend with my daughter and son-in-law feels so happy at the time, but I'm also afraid of how long this situation can continue. When all of these relationships become known and end, I'll be left with neither a husband, a daughter, nor a son-in-law. I do not want to excuse myself by saying that I've done nothing wrong, but I'm tormented because I have no idea how to end this situation, fearing that if I continue just a little bit longer, it will eventually go awry. Interestingly, these days, as I act as a buffer between my daughter and son-in-law, they seem to live as if they were siblings. I can see that my son-in-law is getting used to switching his attitude towards me as a mother and as a lover. These are such peaceful days, but I really don't know if it's okay to maintain this painful state. Rather, I feel a sense of melancholy at the thought that I'm finally enjoying the joy of being a woman that I couldn't even experience after getting married and during my honeymoon. On the other hand, I always imagine the worst outcome due to the thought that this is a wrong relationship and I should correct it even now. What should I do?